ICQ Podcast episode 258, getting ready for the 6-metre season. Well, hello fellow amateur ham radio enthusiasts, and welcome to this, our 258th episode of the ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast, supported by Barry Hull, Golf Delta Zero Sierra Foxtrot India from the Isle of Man UK, and our monthly and annual subscription donors. In this episode, Martin M0MNG is joined by Edmund Mike 0 Mike November Golf, Matthew Mike 0 November Juliet X-Ray, and Bill November 3 Juliet India X-Ray to discuss latest amateur ham radio news. Myself, Colin M6BOY, rounds up the news in brief, and this episode's feature is a feature on getting ready for the 6-metre season. Well, as always, it's a great time up front here to thank our donors, our monthly and annual subscription donors who help pay our way and as they keep the show advert free for you. And our new subscription donor here, Barry Hull, Golf Bravo Zero Sierra Foxtrot India from the Isle of Man. We'd like to thank you as well for setting up a annual subscription. Barry, many thanks. You help keep the podcast advert free. And I say thank you very much for supporting our efforts here on the ICQ podcast. Well, now we join Martin, Edmund, Matthew and Bill to discuss the latest amateur ham radio news, including battery-powered smart bags and Whisper Beacon on the way to the Arctic. We hope you enjoy.
Well, hi guys, and welcome to episode 258 of the ICQ News Roundtable. Tonight, I'm joined by Mr. Edmund Spicer M0MNG. Good evening, Edmund.
Hello, Martin. Hello, everybody.
And You told us that you've had dental surgery today, so you're not 100%, but you made sense to us early, Edmund, so don't worry about it.
I'm suffering the effects of industrial strength painkillers at the moment, so if I sound slightly different or if I make even less sense than usual, I apologise in advance.
Yeah, no problems. You sound good to me. We also have Mr. Matthew Nassau, M0NJX. Hi, Matt.
Hey, how you doing, everybody?
Yeah, and Matt and I were playing at the club on Monday, and we're also on HMS Belfast this Saturday, aren't we?
We are. I'm having a busy week of radio.
Yeah.
We've also got tomorrow's talk as well at the club, so, it's a full week of events.
Yeah, and a lot of ICQ involvement, because Dan's doing the talk at the club tomorrow.
Fantastic.
So, yeah. And from the other side of the pond, we have Mr. Bill Barnes, I almost given you a UK call sign, Bill. N3JIX.
Thanks for the call out there. I like that. Good evening, everybody.
Yeah, evening, Bill. And, I say, good to have you back with us. I say it's been about 4 weeks since we sat down and done a podcast with this group. Certainly seems a long time anyway, with the Christmas break in the middle. So hopefully everybody will enjoy tonight's chat. Our first news story, and we kick this one around quite a lot. It's not really radio, but it is technology related, and that is battery-powered smart bags raise safety concerns. Now, I'm going to go last on this one because I have some strange feelings. But Matt, you did quite a search on this and then got put off by the price, didn't you?
Well, yeah. First of all, I had to look up what exactly is a smart bag. It's a new one for me, and I do a lot of traveling in my work, but I make do with regular luggage. So a quick internet search, and I found really the first link that I came across was a company that had an idea about somehow evolving traditional luggage into something a bit more contemporary that answers some issues that travelers might have. And they have a very nice professional video that describes what they did, how they crowdsourced the idea, and finally produced a product. And these smart bags it's a suitcase, right? It's a suitcase, but it has inside a battery, which powers some electronics that does a bit of thinking. So some of the examples that this company has brought to market are basically a location device. So it will, I guess, using GPS, figure out where it is and send a location to your phone app, which means that you don't lose it, or in theory, you kind of know where it is. It also has built-in weighing scales, so that as you load the bag and understand how heavy it's going to be for your airline allowance, it will give you some feedback about that. and so on and so forth. Also, it has a built-in USB charger, so it can power devices like phones and so forth, which I admit is often a problem at airports where you're trying to find a plug in the right shape for a foreign country and to charge your phone. And that's okay. That's great. It's a new product being brought to market. It's technology. It does have an associated cost, which I thought was quite prohibitive to my personal needs, and I will continue to use the bathroom scales and just keep an eye on my luggage and not leave it anywhere randomly, and I'll pretty well be covered, I think. But it does open, well, it does step into the realm of bringing batteries, and specifically, well, lithium batteries or whatever device, nickel, cadmium, or so forth, onto airplanes, and how you can. What are the limitations of bringing them on? I think we're all pretty familiar with some of the issues around recent electrical devices that have caught fire for various design or physical issues with the devices. But on an airplane, that's a significant risk. Transporting batteries, airlines have a specific policy around it. It's both national, at a national level, and airline level. And so putting a dependency for a battery into luggage, which has to go into the hold or hand luggage or wherever it might be, is a potential cause for concern. I'm sure they've done their homework and they know their market, but at the same time, existing policies for carrying batteries, okay, because I know as a ham radio guy myself, I've carried lithium ion these LiPo batteries that I use for portable work, and I've taken them on hand luggage and I had to go through an explanation of what it is and how it works and so forth. So I don't know. It's from my personal perspective, it's an object on the market which I probably won't invest in, but it would be interesting to see how they cope with onboard battery policy at airports and airlines, because it has an impact, I guess, just on radio as well.
Yeah. Well, my worry is that if you're going to track your case, you could be, going off to, say, the States, going off to New York and finding your bags in Australia, and you'd know about it.
Maybe that's peace of mind. People want to know where it is. You don't want to lose it in Vienna and find you're back in, Lisbon or something. And I'm sure there was a market for it. I'm sure they're doing quite well, and I'm sure there are other businesses out there doing the same kind of thing. But you get a feeling that you're introducing technology for technology's sake. You're reinventing something just so you can sell it in a different way, and producing more. I don't know how these things work, GPS, Bluetooth, or whatever. You're adding more, maybe frequency noise. You're adding more fire risk. You're adding. I don't know. It doesn't seem necessarily a good rotation of the wheel of progress, in my perspective, in my opinion.
Yeah. Bill, do you have these similar problems in the States?
Yes, almost identical. I'm going to point out for the listeners, if you're traveling to the States, please, look up the PackSafe lithium ion directions that's on the Federal Aviation Administration's webpage. When I traveled a few months ago, I had a battery with me that was lithium iron phosphate, and I stayed within the rules. It was under the 100 watt hours, way under actually, and because it had it printed right on the battery, the guy checking my carry-on bag looked at it and said, how big is this battery? And I pointed that out, and he goes, oh, it's 36. That's less than 100. You're good to go. And then he proceeded to rip the rest of my bag apart for other reasons, but at least that got past him. So that's always good to keep in mind, especially when you travel. And, like Matt was talking about, you got to check where you're going from. You also have to check where you're going to with this kind of stuff. And I think that's part of this article's concern is you're taking a lithium battery bag, but it might not be okay to bring that into another country if you're flying internationally. So you got to check that kind of stuff out too.
Yeah. Well, I suppose in certain circumstances, if the bag went faulty, you've literally flying with a flying bomb, aren't you? But Edmund, what do you think?
Well, I don't fly regularly at all, but the last few times have been from Gatwick to Glasgow, And on each occasion, I've seen people on board using laptops and other electronic devices that would contain batteries similar to these. So my immediate reaction on reading this news story is, why has this ban come in place? The story mentions about the recent infamous exploding mobile phones and hoverboards. Well, the mobile phones, and one in particular that notoriously was recalled, that always seemed to catch fire when it was being charged or shortly afterwards. The hoverboards and e-cigarettes, if they're going to catch fire or explode, will normally do it when they're in use. So when a large amount of current has been pulled from the cells. So all the time you're not charging anything up or pulling big amounts of current. All the time your bag's just sitting there. I wouldn't have thought that it was particularly likely to fail and catch fire. So the only thing I can think of is, are they worried? Are the airlines worried that if another bag, a heavy suitcase, gets thrown on top of one of these, that the weight of it could crush and destroy the battery? But other than that, I don't really know what the reasoning is behind it. And incidentally, if you go onto YouTube, search for a video called "Don't Poke a Lithium Polymer Cell," and you can see exactly what happens if you do poke a lithium polymer cell. And that's something that you don't want happening on an aeroplane.
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned to the boys earlier, there was a period of time I was out of work, and you do anything legal to feed the family. And I spent some time at London Gatwick Airport loading aeroplanes. And guys, bags get thrown down the inside of the aircraft's belly. There's usually a guy in the doorway, and on certain planes anyway, and he will throw them down to the guy stacking them, who's on his knees stacking them into an area. So cases do get damaged. Heavy cases get put in. It depends on when they come up the conveyor belt into the plane. And you know, I went out to Cyprus back end of October, and wife bought a brand new case, and that got damaged on its first flight, broke the handle. You know, the case looked perfectly okay externally, but it had broken the pull-up handle. So cases do get damaged. But the other one I'm half concerned is, and you should never do this, but people still do, is travelling with aerosols in your cases. If an aerosol let go, and you know, you've got all these lithium batteries in the hold, I wonder whether you could get something a bit naughty going on. But not wishing to put fear and uncertainty and doubt into the minds of those who fly, they obviously should check your bags via X-ray to make sure you haven't got aerosols in and things like that. But just an interesting one. If you damage the battery, you could have a problem. But like Matt said, I think this is technology for technology's sake. Anyway, well, I'm sure we'll get some lively response back from our listeners on that one. Moving on, the new technician license question pool has been released over in the States, and there are now 428 questions in the technician pool. Bill and I were talking about this earlier because we've both been through this, but I think it's a good thing, and we kind of thought that Dan will be frantically rewriting his book at the moment, won't he, Bill?
He at least has to do some updates for sure. They don't throw the whole pool out and start over. They make incremental changes from what I understand, but still, it's just the fact that they take the time to go through, look at the pool, make sure stuff is relevant, make sure it's covering all the, you know, check marks on the, you know, we want to test people on the following things, and this pool's good till 2022. So if you're trying to get anybody in, they'll need some new study material starting July 1st. But it's, you know, pretty solid, I think.
Yeah. Well, that's the important thing, is that you tend to buy the study material for the question pool you're going to take the exam on. So the books will be rewritten. So anybody, as Bill says, who's taking this exam from July the 1st, 2018, will need the new study guides. If you're going to do it before then, you can use the current study guides, obviously. Matthew, your thoughts on this one?
Well, I've only ever done the UK license, foundation, intermediate, and full license. And I think, as we were discussing, I like the idea of publishing the questions. I think that the body of knowledge is there. This is what we will test you on. Learn it in the best way you can, and then we'll examine you. And I guess that, maybe that's the ideal outcome. And I think the US obviously have a larger intake of candidates that sit the exams. They have a large pool, 400 questions, 428 questions. And, if when it's public and people like Dan and others also kind of can capitalize on that and try to help students through that learning curve. In the UK, of course, ours is a smaller hobby and presumably a smaller question pool, and it's not disclosed, which means you have to kind of think of the theory and just think of what is in the scope of your license grade, foundation, intermediate, or full, and learn that rather than, in theory, learning statements. I don't assume that everyone can learn by rote the question pool of any class of license and expect that they will be ready for any outcome in the exam. You have to understand what you're being tested on, and I think that's the important thing. But I like the idea of it being open. You can explore it. You can test each other if you're in little tuition school pools or collectives in a club of students who are going to take the exam. It's a known, which is a Rumsfeldian comment. But so I would like to see it in the UK, but I think we're probably not big enough, and maybe there is a value to not disclosing. I don't know. Maybe there's some teachers out there who can explain to us the value of having sort of open book tests, kind of in this way where the questions are published versus just know the theory and we'll test you on any part of it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, I think the thing is that there are courses, or there are sort of meetings where guys sit around, and if you want to write questions for the UK, you can go on a course, and they run weekends where they try and get people to write questions, but they have to be unambiguous. They have to be fair. They have to. There's a lot more to it. So I've written a few pre-exam questions, and some of them are a bit jokey. Some make people think, but I'm sure mine would have been thrown out because they wouldn't have met their criteria. And I think it's a bit more difficult, but it's an interesting one. Edmund, obviously you haven't done the States license, but your thoughts, would the States system be better than the UK, or?
Well, I've never been outside of Europe, which is not a good thing to admit, and I've only operated under CPT a couple of times. So for that reason, I haven't had the pleasure, if pleasure's the right word, of attempting to pass any level of the American license. I don't really have an opinion on this one, Martin. I don't know enough about it.
Yeah. Well, as I say, it's an interesting way of doing it, and having done it, and Bill and I were discussing this before we hit the record button, it's one of those things. There are some questions that are really obscure from a UK point of view, that are US specific, that I had to learn, and I got them wrong, and I had to learn because they were asking me questions that were important to the US. But I think when I got them wrong, it just forced me down to reading that part of the book again and understanding that part of the book. So I think it's a good thing having a question pool. And in fairness, not many people are going to remember 428 questions, the answers to them, because there's a lot of questions that are going to be very, very similar. And so I don't think you'll be able to do it just off the top of your head. Your last thoughts on this one, Bill?
once again, it's, really good that I think that they refresh these every so often, because, things don't radically change, but they incrementally change. And I really appreciate the fact that the folks that take care of the question pool here in the States spend a lot of time looking at this and making sure it's still relevant and valid.
Yeah, which is a good thing. So, thanks for that. Moving on, Indonesian Pirates on 7 megs. It just strikes me as a bit naughty. They've been heard sort of singing, laughing, talking away, and they've been quite strong into Europe. Edmund, you said you hadn't heard them, but, what do you think about the fact that people just go by radio and just squirt it into Europe?
I haven't heard them, but I haven't been going out of my way to listen for them. And my antenna for 40 metres is quite low to the ground, so it's all right for near vertical incident skywave contacts into the UK and Europe. But I would imagine I would need a vertical antenna or something with a high angle of radiation if I was going to be in with the chance of hearing them. In terms of where they are, in Region 1, the top end of that frequency band they've mentioned there, 7040, roundabout there is the weak signal stuff. From memory, the whisper frequency on 40 metres is on 7.0386, I think, somewhere around there. So it's particularly unfortunate if they transmit there, because they'll probably be blotting out quite a lot of weak signal stuff. A bit lower down the band where it's just CW, it might not cause quite so much trouble, because CW can slot in amongst other modes elsewhere on the band. I have heard CW on 40 metres, almost up on 7.2, and it's managed to slot in between the voice SSB contacts, so maybe that's not quite so bad, but the weak signal interference is probably very serious. In terms of the people who do it, well, I don't know, because to be able to get a strong signal from as far away as Indonesia into Europe, you would think that the people operating the radios would at least have to have some kind of idea of what they were doing and how it worked. It's not like on much higher frequencies where you could probably just buy a whip antenna off an internet auction site or something like that. So I assume that these pirates do at least have some idea of what they're doing, in which case you would think that they would realise that they were overlapping with the CW and weak signal part of 40 metres. So I just don't know what the answer is. We have these bulletins that come out fairly regularly, and this is what the news story is talking about, isn't it? But you could pick any edition from the last couple of years, and broadly speaking, you'll have the same reports of the same infractions on the same frequencies. So it's all very well reporting it, that it's going on, but what in practical terms are we actually going to do about it? Don't know the answer to that. Having said that, though, I do recommend reading these when they come out, because there's a certain entertainment value in there sometimes from the way that some reports are worded. There's the occasional bit of strong language, so don't read it if you're easily offended. And there is information in there about transmissions which are heard on the amateur bands but that are legal from primary users on certain bands, and those are quite interesting as well. So I recommend reading the bulletin when it comes out, but in terms of what we can actually do about Indonesian people down the bottom end of 40 metres, I've no idea.
Yeah, I guess not a lot, but it's worth knowing about. Matthew, what's your thoughts?
Well, a pirate in Indonesia, someone jamming a repeater in the UK, it just shows you it's a global problem. And as Edmund points out, this quite interesting monitoring newsletter that we've been discussing, you leaf through it and you'll just see someone has heard an infraction on the amateur bands from some point. It could be over-the-horizon radar. It could be pirates. It could be even one that caught my eye was Spanish fishery daily news with splattering up on 53 kilohertz. It's a bit like make an analogy. It's a bit like we're observing people dropping litter. We all want to try and keep the world clean, no plastic bags floating around sea turtles and things like that. And we've observed someone, infringing on those general rules for radio spectrum cleanliness. So what can you do? In theory, ideally, we would quickly triangulate the location, send in the team, whether it's the BBC van tracking TV licensed dodgers, or if it was, proper radio abuse detection vans or something, flying in with helicopters and abseiling into the building and finding them red-handed at the microphone. That's never going to happen, right? It's never going to happen. Well, at least not when it's necessarily not damaging, police radios or fire and so forth. Then I think that gets more attention. It takes effort, it takes money, it takes time, and it takes people to try to stop other people from their mindless acts or their negligence or their just maybe potentially innocent and inadvertent misuse of a radio somewhere.
Yeah.
Look, it will happen. When the technology is out, it's out of the bag. People have radio, so you're going to hear them. And on one side, if I could hear these guys down in Indonesia, I'd be fantastic. If I could pick them up on 40 meters from my KX3, I'd be high-fiving it. I've got a 10,000 kilometer signal. But, we differentiate between what's a good radio signal and what's something we want to chase and listen to versus something which is pollution, quote unquote. It shouldn't be there. So I don't know.
Yeah, I was going to say, are we the only service, us amateurs, that bother to check all these bands? Do the authorities only check the parts of the spectrum where they're getting paid for it? Would be one question. And in fairness, the chances of getting caught or anybody doing anything about it in Indonesia is probably more chance of me winning the lottery 3 times in a row, I guess. Bill, what's your thoughts?
I really don't have much to add. Matt really beat this one to death. Great job, Matt. Thumbs up, buddy.
Sorry about that, Matt. Off the soapbox now, guys. Thank you.
But I do want to chime in on what Edmund said. These Region 1 newsletters are a really good read. It is very amusing. Not this one. A couple before, they had some real neat screenshots of some signals, unknown signals they found. Just stuff like that shows up every once in a while. Very, very fascinating stuff, and also very fun to read on some of them. Yeah. Well, let's hope that somebody does something about it, or maybe there are amateurs in Indonesia that can have serious words with people and maybe clean up the pollution of the airwaves. Moving on, this is one that excited Bill because I know he wants this as a continent, but there's a new whisper beacon on its way down to Antarctica. There's a German team putting it in, so Bill, over to you first on this one. Yeah, this is very interesting. They're sending a whisper beacon, also a whisper receiver down to Antarctica at the German research station. And I didn't know this. They're using a red Pitaya. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Which I thought was just a piece of test equipment, but actually it's a SDR and it can do way so much more. So I end up spending way too much time reading about this thing. The thing that really perked my interest was that they're simultaneously monitoring all the bands from 160 meters to 15 meters, and they're doing the whisper beacon on it. So very, very, very fascinating project that they're doing here, and I can't wait to start seeing how that works.
Yeah, so, I mean, there's lots of interesting things happening with a lot of these data modes, and as you say, this looks a very, very interesting piece of kit. So, good one. Now, Edmund, you said you didn't think you were going to be able to receive this from Antarctica because we're in the Northern Hemisphere, and I won't do the joke we did earlier, so over to you.
Well, in the beginning, probably because of my brain is being addled by these painkillers. I was thinking that Antarctica was up at the top end of the world, the North Pole, and I was going to say, oh yes, down here at my QTH, I've received and been received by stations up there, up the northern end of Norway, on 20 metres, and that's well within the Arctic Circle, isn't it? And then, of course, I remember that Antarctica is completely down the other end of the planet, so I'm not sure I rate my chances particularly. I'm thinking if I'm going to receive it, probably summer rather than winter, maybe on 15 metres. If propagation runs that way, maybe around the middle of the day, something like that. But I'm not holding out my chances. And I don't know if short path or long path would be my best bet. So if anybody knows a whole lot more about propagation than I do, then please do bring forth your recommendations.
Yeah. But I know you're a Whisper man. You like playing with Whisper, so hopefully you will pick this one up. Matt,
yeah, I'm not a major league whisperer though. Most of my activity in inverted commas is with the Whisper Lite, the Whisper Lite Classic as it's now called, seeing as there's a more recent Whisper Lite Flexi upgrade that's come into existence. It's mostly that on 20 metres at 200 milliwatts. I do sometimes diversify onto other bands, but as far as Whisper goes, no, I'm almost exclusively on 20 metres, so a very minor league player.
Yeah. But this will do 20, and they will be on 20 metres at some point in time, so you might be lucky. Matt, you and I don't tend to do this sort of stuff, but it's an interesting concept what they're doing, isn't it?
It is. So I had to go and look up Red Pitaya as well. I had heard about it, in the sort of electronic magazines that I peruse every now and then at the newsagents. It's a sophisticated piece of kit. Let's say the starting price is maybe sort of like €250 for the basic board. And you quickly realize it's not an Arduino. It's not a simple, kind of script-driven tool. As Bill points out, it's a software-enabled tool, electronic platform, if you like, that you can use sort of out of the box for certain functions. So you can use it as an oscilloscope. You can use it as a spectrum generator. You can use it as a who knows what. Or they have come out with an SDR ham kit version of the board and all that good stuff. Or of course you could write your own code and use it as a platform for your own projects and programming. But it just kind of I guess in this respect it's overkill for a simple Whisper platform, as I think Edmund was talking about, this fairly simplistic classic kit and so forth. But what Bill's pointing out is to monitor the spectrum, the whole spectrum, and then to also transmit and report on the web and all that kind of stuff is fantastic. And yeah, it's great that someone has the initiative to go down to the Antarctic, which is pretty much a conservation zone for the world. And I think we have to thank the Technical University of Munich and the University of Bremen and the German Amateur Radio Society for bringing that along. It seems like it's, I don't know, maybe one of the researchers down there is bringing it as a sort of a personal project and putting it in the backpack and going to take it down there for his tour of Antarctica and set it up. It's great. It's great. But I think in this case, this is technology, not just for technology's sake, but this seems more interesting than an automated suitcase, if I could say that.
I think it's a fair comment that it's more interesting than an automated suitcase. So, but very, very interesting. So, guys, if you're into Whisper, there will be a station on in Antarctica, and hopefully you'll be able to see if your signal makes it down there or not. Moving on, I kind of like this one. There's some nice stories in this episode. A gentleman with a 3D printer decided to print a radio. Now, before you all get terribly excited, he was just printing the carcass and the holder for some of these things. And obviously then he used the electronic bits. He didn't print a printed circuit board, with a 3D printer, although hopefully that ain't too far away. Matt, you saw it, but it's an interesting video as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's a great video. It's one of these. This gentleman called Sage Hanson down in Texas. I think he's down in Houston. Is clearly a keen 3D printer guy, and I think he maybe has a channel, YouTube channel, and he's doing all that kind of stuff. And he introduces to his audience or people from a 3D printer perspective the ability to prepare the chassis, if you like, for a crystal radio set. And, watching it from, let's say, my experience of having built these things in the past and knowing all about radio, and it's all great. It was a wonderful video of someone, say, outside our hobby, whose own interests are just tangentially touching our hobby. He likes 3D printing, and he's found a way to overlap that into radio and introduce the idea of having the magic of radio with no batteries and no wall socket or wall wart, and just running off the radio power of the waves themselves. So you think of the audience that he has and the maker mindset of his audience, of people that design and craft things and design widgets and God knows what else. And it's great that he's bringing to his audience a little piece of radio. I think it's a great crossover. Yeah,
I thoroughly enjoyed the video, and I think it went very well. Bill, you saw this as well. Yeah, would you be involved with doing something like this, or do you need a 3D printer like me?
Yeah, I don't already have a 3D printer. I'm still waiting on. There's a couple I almost jumped out and got, but I'm waiting for a few more features and a few little bit more evolution and price point on them. They're getting better, but they're not quite there yet. But yeah, as Matt was saying, this is very interesting. He's printing out parts and then building a receiver out of it, and it's pretty far along. And so we were joking beforehand about can't wait for the day when they 3D print a copper circuit board, so I don't have to wait 4 days for it to show back from the place I order them online, but just crank them out at the house. But not quite there yet. But it's still a very interesting project for those that like to play with the 3D printers.
Yeah. And I believe that, I heard somewhere that NASA has a 3D printer on the space station, so they can print spare parts up on there. But obviously a far more expensive printer than Joe Public and ourselves could afford. Edmund, you interested in this sort of thing of printing a chassis and then maybe building a crystal set?
Crystal sets and yours truly have a love-hate relationship. That's at the hate end at the moment because I built one at the weekend and it doesn't work. So I might take my mind off the disappointment with that by watching this video. I haven't watched it yet, but I would certainly like to. And I don't know if my particular one is I've just stuffed it up, or if there aren't any signals locally that are strong enough to make it work. So yes, once the tooth is better and I'm feeling more like myself again, I'm definitely going to watch this video. And I don't own a 3D printer. I've never even seen one, and I've certainly never used one. So my Luddite tendencies are coming out, Martin.
No, I don't. Well, none of us have one of these 3D printers. I'm like Bill. At the moment, I can't justify the cost for what I want to do. Well, I can't justify the cost for the amount I would do. If I was using it a lot, then I probably could. But certainly 3D printers can be very, very useful. Crystal sets, well, as you say, they're love-hate. And if yours is not working, I'm sure if you leave it for a day or so and then go back and look at it, it will be blatantly obvious what's wrong. As I say, that's often the case. Sometimes you can get too close to a situation and you can't see the wood for the trees. But yeah, it was a really interesting video, and I know it was a crystal set, but very, very interesting video to watch. Right, our last news story was pretty much an announcement more than a news story, but I really, really like this. It was a gentleman, Gary, has produced an operating guide for FT8. And I put it in the show notes as we're going to discuss it. And Bill, you wrote back and said, you must read this, guys, to everybody. So it's a great piece of work, isn't it?
Yes. Between sending people that email me questions about FT8, the feature episode I did, I don't know how long ago that was. I have a one-pager template I send people, just email it out, bang. I'm going to stop doing all that, and I'm just going to send them this 28 pages that Gary ZL2IFB wrote, the link to it at least, because it's really good. It's very complete at this point, and it's paced. So he actually, he puts a little bit of text, and he explains some things, and he explains some ifs and thans, because some radios are different. And he explains, screenshots. It's a really good article, 28 pages. So if you're really trying to work FT8, if you really want to get the most out of FT8, take a little time and read this. I learned a few things, and I've been using FT8 since the day they started the betas, the release candidates.
Yeah. Well, as I say, when I saw it, I must admit, I opened I saw the news story, I opened the document, and thought, wow, this we have to talk about, because when somebody puts that much effort into producing effectively, which will probably become the de facto standard document on the subject, it was well worth a look. Edmund, are you an FT8 person?
I'm not yet. Whisper and JT65 and CW, although some people, there is debate over whether CW is technically a digital mode or not. I don't think it is, but why did I mention it? I don't know. All right, we'll scrub that bit. JT65 and Whisper I have done, but that is all. If I was going to have a go at FT8, which I'm sure I will one of these days, it's yet another one of the things on my I will get round to it eventually list. This is the document that I would refer to and read thoroughly if I was going to read anything at all. I have read it at speed this evening for the first time, and it does look very good and very well written. And FT8 does seem to be the digital mode of choice at the moment, doesn't it? Sitting on the bed next to me, I've got a portable radio, an Eaton E5, which receives single sideband as well as AM and FM. And because I've had a couple of sleepless nights for the past few days, what with the tooth keeping me awake, I've been tuning around the shortwave bands using nothing but the telescopic antenna that's built into the radio. Now, obviously, on top band, that antenna is absolutely tiny and extremely inefficient. But the thing that I've really noticed is that on that band, and on 80 meters as well, even if there are no other signals of any kind audible on that radio, even if it's 3 o'clock in the morning, the one thing I will hear is a huge amount of FT8 activity clustered around the FT8 frequency. So this mode is clearly where the future lies, for now anyway, until the next latest and greatest thing comes along and takes over. So I'm sure I'll get involved eventually, and this publication will be my go-to reference, I think.
Yeah. Well, Matt, we started a new project as a club project.
Yes, we did.
I think FT8 might come very close to being our preferred mode of operation when we give it a good try, don't you think?
Yeah, so just before we go in, I do want to make clear the guy's full name and his location, because it is a great document, something to really go to and start as a starting place for learning this digital mode. So his full name is Gary Hanson. His call is G4IFB, but also has ZL2IFB. And his website is g4ifb.com. And I think if you just go there and search for FT8, you'll come across the FT8 Operating Guide. But you're absolutely right, Martin. So the club is looking at using digital modes, and in the next couple of weeks we're going to try it on EME, Earth Moon Earth bouncing. And so just on Monday night at the club, all of a sudden I came in, having been away for a couple of months, to see a hive of activity dusting off nice long high gain Yagis for 2 meters, with the intention of getting ready for a car park visit in a couple of weeks to look at the moon and see if we can listen to anything and maybe even work the world with JT65, which is, I guess, the link to FT8, both coming from the Joe Taylor stable. And, so I'm definitely not a digital guy, but this is something that it's being presented to me. Here it is. Go and read it. Go and learn. So it looks fantastic. Absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. Well, as I say, if nothing else, guys, you listeners out there, if anybody has any interest in FT8, the FT8 book, we will put in the show notes a link to it. But this is the number one download for you. And I would suggest this will become the de facto standard over the next few months on how to do FT8. So there you go. Right, well, that concludes the news stories. Guys, what have you been up to radio-wise since we last spoke? Bill, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'd love to go first. So I got to enjoy a wonderful week between Christmas and New Year's off, and I hardly did any radio stuff because we were traveling and visiting and all the other stuff. My soda backpack got quite a little triple. I took it with me in the car, but the weather was so bitter cold here. I talked myself out of going outside, so that killed that. But then after the holidays, we just had the RTTY Roundup, ARRL RTTY Roundup here on January 6th and 7th. I only got the 2.5 hours into the thing. Was able to work 38 stations. Bands are pretty busy. A lot of RTTY running around out there, which is always good. I hit 80, I hit 40, I hit 20. It was a good time. So I always like to point those contests out. Likewise, coming up on January 27th and 28th is the British Amateur Radio Teledata Group's RTTY Sprint is coming up. If you are or are not in the RTTY contesting, that one's a fun one because it's just a call sign and serial number, move on kind of RTTY contest. That's not everyone's into that, but it's fun. It's another one that the work there coming up. Likewise, because I do FT8, because I did the RTTY contest, I started chasing grids. Oh, yeah, big groan. ARRL International Grid Chase is going on for 2018, and they put a leaderboard up. It's not finalized. This is a very beta board. It'll be ready at the end of the month. But currently I'm in 4,481st place with 40 unique grids. Well done. So I really need to kick my game up here a little bit here, guys. It's based off the Logbook of the World, if anyone's wondering how that, it just figures it out based on Logbook of World QSLs. So most of them, I'm almost certain almost all of them is from the RTTY contest and the little bit FT8 I did on New Year's Day. But I don't know why I'm chasing grids. I chased grids 20 some odd years ago, 22 years ago, and it was boring, but I'm chasing grids again.
Yeah. Well, I think what happens is that you rekindle your interest, or you're obviously in the new modes, so that's what's giving you the chase the grids, I would suggest, Bill.
It's all fun and games until you're building a 6-meter beam on top of a mountain.
Right. Well, I wouldn't argue against that. So that's a good one. Edmund, what have you been up to over the Christmas period?
Very little, amateur radio-wise. Around about the shortest day of the year, the 21st of December in the Northern Hemisphere, when we had quite a few hours of darkness and not very much daylight, I did experiment with transmitting and receiving whisper on top band using a very inefficient antenna, which was basically my 40-metre inverted V with some extra wire clipped on the end of it with the inner and the outer of the coax shorted together and then driven against some radials on the ground. And that allowed me reception of 2 stations from America. So whatever the rights and wrongs of whisper, it got my call sign on a band where it doesn't normally appear. I'm a very rare bird on 160 metres, and it's also the first time that I've ever gone transatlantic in any way, shape or form on that band, even though it was only reception. I heard the stations in America, but they didn't hear me. Using the same antenna, I also ran a receive only on 472 kilohertz. And it was quite noticeable that on the actual shortest day of the year, I received quite a lot of stations from the UK and nearby continental Europe, more so than the days before and afterwards. So I get the impression that people who are active on that band, who transmit on that band, perhaps made a special effort for the winter solstice. There were a lot more stations to be heard that day than in other nearby days. But apart from that, I've done very little. I'm looking forward to 2018, though, because this year is the 70th anniversary of the club that I belong to, the Worthing District Amateur Radio Club. Lots of changes going on. We've changed venue this week. We meet for the first time in a new venue, having been in the old venue for at least 25 years, if not more. So we've got that move, and we've also got, as I say, the 70th anniversary of the club, which was founded in 1948. There is talk of a special event call sign, possibly. Don't know how that's going to pan out. We also have 2 club call signs, Golf 1 Whiskey Oscar Romeo and Golf 3 Whiskey Oscar Romeo, which we can put the letter X in at the beginning, so to make it GX to show we're a club station. And again, there are no concrete plans as yet, but I'm hoping that the club collectively is going to put those call signs on the air quite a lot with activities, field days, that kind of thing. They certainly will if I have anything to do with it. And one of the things that I'm possibly going to try to do is get permission to use the Golf X-Ray 1 call sign during the summer months, during the sporadic east season on 6, 4 and 2 metres. Because that's an old class. I know both of them these days are full call signs, and you can use the G1 or the G3 on HF or VHF, but back when they were allocated, we did still have the Class A, Class B split. So even now we tend to use the Golf 1, which is an old B license on VHF, and Golf 3 on the HF bands. So I'm going to try to put GX1 WOR on the air over the summer months, particularly on 6 metres. So watch this space.
That'll be good, Edmund. That'll be a good one. So you have been very busy. Yeah, it's surprising what we do get up to. Matthew, I know you've been busy because you were making lots of noise at the club on Monday.
Well, yeah, I perhaps can't say it necessarily radio related, but I'll get to that in a second, I guess. Over Christmas, I had a very peaceful but busy Christmas with my family in Spain. And for Bill's reference, it was only 70 degrees Fahrenheit over the holidays, so it was tough. But I did make a small code practice oscillator to take down with me. I just wanted something small to pack in my bag, so a little sort of classic tobacco tin kind of design. Dropped it in, and away I went. And as I was practicing, my code over the holidays, my son took an interest, and he's 7, so that's quite exciting. So we played with an app on my phone, which does all the letters and stuff like that for him. And he's excited to maybe have his own little key to play with So it was a little building project orientated, radio related Christmas for me. I came back and on thinking about what I could build, I started playing around with some ideas. One idea I came up with was a little project that's on the internet. It was originally come up from a couple of guys at MIT, the media lab at MIT, and they call it the Drawdio. Now, the Drawdio is a contraction of the words draw and audio, and basically it's a 555 timer, very simple 3 or 4 parts to the circuit. But you basically bolt it onto a pencil. Any pencil will do, but the softer, the more 2B, 3B, 4B kind of grade pencil, the better. And it makes a noise through varying resistances as you draw stuff on paper. So as you draw a circle on paper, the timer's frequency, the audio timer, the square wave that's coming out, changes because the pencil trace that you're drawing on the paper is longer, and therefore the current goes through a longer piece of graphite. And so I brought it down to the club on Monday night and was showing it off and making a bit of noise, having a bit of fun. It's a great way of actually doing a simple Morse code practice oscillator in itself, because you tap it on anything really, and it will start to beep as you make an electrical circuit. And that's related to my interest, perpetual self-flagellation, if I can say that on the podcast, in trying to perfect the art of making the homemade PCB. So all my little projects that I try to build, my recent CW audio filter, which is of a PA0LQ design, or this code practice oscillator and so forth, are all being built using not VeriBoard or stripboard, but just printing the circuit boards myself at home with a bit of software and the toner transfer method, which I think I've given maybe a podcast talk on a couple of years ago, I think. But as I go through it, I try to perfect this, trying to apply solder mask to the board and various bits and pieces. It's still experimental, but having good fun with that, hands on. But apart from really spending time in Spain, and I was helping my wife finish moving into the place we have down there. So that was somewhat stressful. I've come back to work, and I can make plenty of excuses for no radio time, other than to say that I'm looking forward to this week, where I've had the Monday Night Club. I've had today's Wednesday. We're doing the recording. Tomorrow we have a great talk by Dan Romanchik on Morse code. And on Saturday, we're down at the HMS Belfast operating on GB2RN in hopefully some good radio conditions. So it's probably the busiest week I've had for radio in a while.
Yeah, so you're going to OD on radio this weekend.
Be carrying me out.
Yeah, so that's good. Well, you guys have done a hell of a lot. What have I been up to? Well, predominantly I've been playing with my SDR radios. I got the FunCube dongle out and started looking at the satellites as they were going over the FunCube and decoding the telemetry off it. I've played with my SDR Play, and really just enjoyed having a good listen round. Martin gave me a little bit of stick over this. And in fairness, before you all grab your pencils and write to Colin or email Colin, I bought a CB a few weeks back at a rally. I paid the princely sum of £3 for it. I was asked by lots of people, why did you want a CB? And I said, there's more parts than £3. There's more than £3 worth of spare parts in it. There's a PA transistor. There's speaker, a microphone, there's knob switches, blah, 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 blah. But quite honestly, I thought I'd give it a try, because CB's a radio mode I don't have. Anyway, I got around to switching it on. This one had belonged to a G4 gentleman, which is a full license holder in the UK. And when I spun it up and put the frequency counter on, I'm afraid I was disappointed, because it's been converted to 10 meters. So, I would have actually preferred it to have been on 11 meters, but I have other radios that do 10 meters more power and, better. So, I'm not that terribly interested. But just to say, I was disappointed it wasn't a CB. I've started a small training course on a Monday night. Decided I've got a couple of members that are desperate to do the radio course, and we haven't got anything booked at the moment, so they've been turning up regularly. So I've started a small training course with two of them. We're doing an hour a night until we cover the syllabus. So that's going to take a little while. And the other thing I've been doing is playing with the Arduino. Still haven't found a real use that I've looked at other people's designs of what they're doing, but I haven't come up with something that I want to do with it yet. But it's a great device. And I'm sure when I can think of an application I want to solve, it will be at the forefront of. So all in all, I think we've had a very busy month, guys. So that's a good one.
Hey, Martin.
Yeah.
One thing I forgot to mention, since you said SDR, is Fox 1D, which is now known as AO92, is in orbit.
Right.
So add 145.880 to your listening list.
Yeah.
It's currently in testing mode, so you just hear Veronica saying that she's in safe mode as she goes by. But it's another FM satellite's up there, one of the EasyQ sats.
That's the good news. And, Chris and I have got to do the satellites soon. I have been looking at, how I want to build my satellite antenna. Chris has built a portable Yagi. I haven't bought an elk or an arrow antenna. I think they're very nice, but I still want to play a bit. I'm not intending to put a rotator and bits and pieces in at home, but I'm looking at a couple of either egg beater or turnstile antennas for 2 meters and 70 sems that I can put up at home and see how they go. So that's kind of where I'm at the moment. I've been doing the research on it. Next few days I ought to start building something, but that's where I am on that one, Bill.
I think you'll be all right with that. I'm actually really shocked how well AO91 and AO92 receives and transmits. Very surprising.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Okay.
And on that note, Martin, if I may just say, Peter Parker, Victor Kilo 3 Yankee Echo, has quite a lot of really good videos on YouTube, and he's released a sequence of videos to do with working AO91 and presumably when it's commissioned AO92 as well. The same techniques would hold true for that. He's released a series of videos on working that using, shall we say, slightly unconventional methods.
Yeah. For
example, 2 completely separate handhelds with no diplexer. And if he's listening, Peter, thank you for the video you did that reviewed a number of different podcasts where he touched on this one, the ICQ podcast, and had some kind words to say about us. So thank you for including us in your review, Peter, if you're listening.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. I haven't picked up on that one, but thanks for telling us, Edmund, and thank you, Peter, for your kind words. I will make the effort afterwards and go and check out your videos. And I knew of Peter and the work he does, so he's very good. He's a big QRP man.
You see, that's why I'm not doing much amateur radio over the Christmas period. I've just been sitting here watching YouTube videos of other people being on the radio rather than doing radio myself.
There you go. Okay, well, let's close it up. I'd like to thank you guys for joining me today. I'd like to thank Edmund, Mr. Edmund Spicer M0MNG.
Many thanks for having me on, Martin 73.
And you did okay, mate. We didn't recognise that you were on drugs. Hi. I'd like to thank Mr. Matthew Nassau, M0NJX.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. Many thanks. And 73s.
73, Matt. And Mr. Bill Barnes, N3JIX. Getting your call sign right this time, Bill.
I appreciate that, and thank you very much. And it was a good chat with everyone. 73.
73.
The ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast, serving the amateur ham radio community fortnightly since 2008.
And now it's time for a look at the news in brief for me, Colin M6BOY. We start with news here on the satellites, the amateur radio satellites. D-Star 1, which was unfortunately lost back in November when the launch vehicle failed to achieve its orbit, is being replaced and being made and constructed and should be ready for launch on the 1st of February this year. Earlier this month, it was announced that the team had completed the assembly and the checks on the new satellite and are hoping to load the satellite on the Soyuz-2 frigate craft, which will be taking off from Russian territory on the 1st of February. Most importantly, obviously, for amateur radio operators, is that the satellite will be carrying a D-Star radio repeater as well. So the AMSAT crowd, they're obviously getting their payloads onto this satellite, which is great news. So we've got a link on the ICQ podcast website with more information for you to check this out. Later on this month, the Australian Communications and Media Authority automatically allows all amateur radio operators in Australia to substitute their normal VK call sign prefix with the letters AX Alpha X-Ray annually during Australian Day. It's to mark their national holiday, which this year falls on the 26th of January 2018. And it gives amateur radio operators a chance to be part of the celebrations of the First Fleet's arrival in 1788 at Sydney Grove and the establishment of the European settlement at Port Jackson with the raising of the British flag by Governor Arthur Phillip. Australia Day is a great opportunity for Australians to celebrate the Australian country and culture. This includes granting awards, honours and celebrating and welcoming citizens into the country from many migrant locations. National flags will be flown throughout the day and celebrations include fireworks displays. The AZEX prefix call sign is very much sought after, so it could be a great opportunity to get this one into your logbooks. And on product news here, Sota Beams have announced that they're starting to stock the Peak Electronics range of test equipments. They're starting off with 6 instruments, which they'll be stocking, which are suitable for use in the Radio Shack or the lab. Sota Beams certainly are very excited about the LCR45 automatic LCR meter, as they use this one every day themselves in their factory. They say it's a handy unit, has a whole host of features, including measuring torrid inductions and characterizing variable capacitors. So certainly more information on the Sota Beams website, where you can check out, say, the range that they'll be stocking from their place in the Manchester area of the UK. Well, now we head over to our features episode, which is a feature on getting ready for the 6-metre season. Guys, I hope you enjoy.
And now what you've all been waiting for, this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast. Hi guys, for this episode I wanted to talk about getting ready for 6 metres. The 6-metre season will be upon us soon. And what do I mean by the 6-metre season? Well, the 6-metre season seems to be in the upper hemisphere or the northern hemisphere between about April and July, where that's the best time to operate 6 metres. However, 6 metres is available all year round, and occasionally, like any other band, you get openings on 6 metres when you don't expect it. Now, 6 metres lives between HF and VHF. It's right at the bottom of a VHF spectrum, but it has a number of characteristics that both mimic HF and VHF characteristics. So it's an interesting band, and a lot of people who operate 6 metres regularly call it the magic band, and this is not to be underestimated. You can have a lot of fun on 6 metres. So if you've bought yourself an HF rig, chances are you will have 6 metres, and we'll come on to that in a minute. Now, I'm going to talk predominantly about the northern hemisphere because that's where I live. However, everything I say will be relevant for the southern hemisphere, apart from the timings, in that your summer starts later in the year, and when we're at winter, you're at summer. Apart from that, it's pretty much the same, I believe. Now, which rig would you use for getting onto 6 metres? Well, in the old days, when I first got into the hobby, I had a old Yaesu FT690, which is a 2.5 watt rig, multi-mode, at 6 metres only. And it worked quite well, but these days, pretty much all HF rigs, or and I say pretty much all, there will be some that don't, but 99% of all HF rigs have 6 meters on them. So they'll do HF and 6 meters. They're 6-meter multi-modes, so there's no excuse. You can do Morse, you can do single sideband, and you can do FM on 6 meters. So what are we going to do? Well, okay, if you're going to use 6 meters, you need to work out what antenna you want. Now, 6 meters, yes, you could have a massive tower with a large Yagi for 6 meters on top, and with a rotator and that sort of thing, and that would certainly help. However, when the band's open, you'd be surprised what you can do with something a bit more conservative. So, what aerials could you use on 6 meters? Well, one of the ones I tend to use when I go out and play is a 6-meter halo, and that works very well. Put it at the top of the mast. The halo's omnidirectional, so not a massive gain in any one direction, but it works very, very well, and I can certainly work all over Europe without any problems with it. I've also built in the past 6-meter dipoles. If you think about it, a 6-meter dipole, the maximum overall length is about 3 meters, or will be less than 3 meters end to end of this dipole. So it's certainly not a massive one you have to support. And if you've got a lightweight mast, you could put that up on a lightweight mast and you'd be surprised just how well it works. Also, if you're using a lightweight mast, there's no reason why you couldn't make a vertical antenna for 6 meters, or even mount your dipole vertically. That would certainly work for you. So antennas are not too much of a problem. They're ideal to roll up and take with you, apart from the Yagi, of course. So you've got a rig, you've got an antenna. How much power are you allowed to use, or how much power do you need to use? Well, I can only really talk about the UK. Different parts of the world have different licensing and have different amounts of frequency allocation. But here in the UK, between 50 megs and 51 megs, the UK allows me to use my full power, my full allocated power. And in my case, being a full licensee, I'm allowed up to 400 watts. An intermediate license holder could use 50 watts, and a foundation license holder could use 10 watts. Now, trust me, 10 watts when the bands are open on 6 meters certainly works, and you'll certainly work all over Europe without any problems. Our upper portion of the band is between 51 and 52 megahertz, and that is allocated to us on a secondary basis, but the power there is limited to about 100 watts. You're not supposed to go over 100 watts, and you're not supposed to cause interference inside or outside the UK. So that's pretty obvious, really, because you shouldn't be causing interference full stop. Now, why does this band become so interesting? Well, when we hit the sunspot maximum, you will get the propagation of HF. So, your signals will bounce off the F layers and move around the world quite happily. But also, because it's a VHF band, you start to get into some of the other interesting modes of propagation, like tropospheric propagation, or tropo. You can get into auroras, bouncing the signal off the aurora, or meteor scatter. There's transequatorial propagation, where you're transmitting across the equator. That's an interesting mode of operation. And you could also use the E layer for propagation. So the 6 meters works with the E layer. And one of the most common ways of getting long distance contacts is using a mode called sporadic E. And what happens with sporadic E is, at certain times of the day and night, or during the open season predominantly, you get ionized gases, and the E layer gets ionized, and it will effectively send our signal on further by bouncing our signal off of the E layer. Now, it can happen any time of the year, but you're more likely within the summer period, late spring to summer period. So don't be put off by 6 meters. There's a lot you can do. It's called the Magic Band, and during the summer when sporadity's in, you should be able to work all over Europe from the UK on around about 10 watts with a dipole. And I know colleagues of mine have said in the past they were absolutely surprised just how well it worked when the band's open. So, it's worth having a look. And we talked about this, calling it getting ready for 6 meters, because if you're ready for it, then when it all comes on board, you can then get out there and have some really good contacts on 6 meters. So when the bands are fully open, and you should be able to work into North America from the UK, South America, Africa, Asia, but obviously when the sunspot cycles are good. Now in the UK, we have our band allocation between 50 and 52 megs. In the States, you're between 50 and 54 megs. So you have to check your own band plans around the world. So what I'm going to say now is this is for UK amateurs or amateurs that want to work UK stations. So if you're outside the UK and you understand where to find the UK amateurs and you want to work the UK, this will give you a better chance. The lower portion of the band, between 50 megs and 50.1 megs, is predominantly set up for use with CW. So you'll get a lot of CW operators down there. The bandwidth of the stations are supposed to be no more than 500 hertz wide. You do find some beacons down there, propagation beacons to check whether the band's open, and you will find some machine operated things going on down there, as are the JT modes and so on. But you will also find the beacons, as I said. So if you want to know if the band's open, listen for a beacon in that sort of area, and you should pick it up. From 50.1 to 50.5, this is where narrow band modes kick in. And we're talking about CW, SSB, and machine operated activity. So in this part of the band, the bandwidth is supposed to be no greater than 2.7 kilohertz wide. And as I say, for SSB and CW, that should be no problems at all. And the JT modes will be very much in that line of operation. Now, it's important to note that, and I believe this to be an international agreement, it is important to note that the area between 50.1 and 50.13 is allocated for DX. It's a DX window, and it's designed for CW and SSB. So if I want to work the States, which is on a different continent, I would look for contact or setting up contacts there between 50.1 and 50.13. Now, I believe that 50.11 is an SSB activity frequency where you would establish a contact and then just move a few kilohertz either way after you've made that contact. If I'm working around Europe, I should not be on those frequencies. And in fairness, if I'm working around Europe, most people listen at 50.15 or above. You'll start to find stations on there at single sideband. So it's very important to know where to look, and I do stress look at your band plan, because if you don't look at your band plan, you don't know where to find the stations. Now, moving on, round about 50.5 to 52, that's where you're going to start to find all sorts of things like internet gateways and packets, and APRS and facsimiles being transmitted, RTTY, slow scan TV, and you'll also start to find some repeaters up there. So there are repeaters in the UK. There are 16 FM repeaters, channel spacing of 10 kilohertz. So got to know what the input and output frequencies are. They are split. I can't remember the exact split now, but they are split quite a way apart. But they work very well, and as I say, there are 16 6-metre repeaters within the UK. So, where are you going to operate? Well, I suppose if you're going to go out and operate, that's one thing. But if you've never tried 6 metres, it's not too difficult to string up a very, very quick dipole at your location. And the fact that the dipole will be less than 3 metres based on the fact of the velocity factor of the cable, even with the insulators and a bit of cord either end to hold your antenna up, you're not really going to be much more than about 5 metres maximum. So if you've got a very small postage stamp garden, you should be able to get 6 metres up and working fairly quick with a dipole. Halo, once again, very, very easy antenna to put up. Very, very small footprint and no problems at all. For portable work, well, once again, exactly the same. If you've got a beam, great, but you've got to carry it with you to the site, and then you've got to make it up and put it up on your pole. And if you've got the time to do it, great. If you haven't, well, your dipole, same dipole as we talked about, and the Halo I've used quite regularly. But you could also use a vertical or flip your dipole vertical to make it a vertical if need be. Now, because there's repeaters in the UK, there's no reason why you can't go 6 metres FM mobile and operate through the repeaters if you want. Or 6 metres from the mobile is certainly an option, because your antenna, although it will have a loading coil at the bottom, is not going to be absolutely massive. So the fact that, yes, it will have a loading coil, so it won't be as efficient as a dipole or a vertical dipole, but it will work very, very well. So that's another option you have. And equally, because it's a summer mode of operation, a lot of the time we're away at summer. We go off on holiday. 6 metres could be a very, very useful band to take with you, because you're not carrying a massive antenna and you're not erecting a massive antenna at your holiday location. So you're not drawing attention to yourself and you're not carrying masses of weight and that sort of thing. So 6 metres during the holiday season could be very, very interesting. And I think once you have a look at the 6 metre band, you'll realise that it is the magic band. I've certainly worked all over Europe on 10 watts or less, and I've had some really good contacts and thoroughly enjoyed myself on there. It does depend whether the band's open, and don't forget, if a band sounds dead, put a call out. If you spent a while putting up an antenna and getting your rig ready, and that you don't hear anything, put a call out and see if anybody comes back to you. Remember, there are more people listening than calling CQ, so it's always worth putting a call out. So I hope this has given you a little bit of a flavour of what to do on 6 metres, and a little bit of flavour on what you might expect. But don't forget, the most important thing is check your band plan for your country. Just because I've told you that it can happen in the UK today doesn't mean to say that the band plan part will be relevant to your country or even legal in my country in a few years' time if things change. So always check your band plan before you operate. I hope this has been of use.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
Well, as we come to the end of episode 258, I hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have recording it for you. For this episode, I'd like to thank Mr. Edmund Spicer M0MNG, Mr. Matthew Nassau M0NJX, and Bill Barnes N3JIX for joining me on the News Roundtable. I know we all enjoyed ourselves recording this one, so as I say, looking forward to many more. If you'd like to get involved, obviously contact us via the website www.icqpodcast.com, or where you can either fill in the form to contact us or email us at info@icqpodcast.com. And say if you have any ideas for features, if you'd like to give us an interview, please talk to us, and we're interested in what you're doing as well. Don't forget, Colin has a newsletter which he sends out every week with just information that doesn't quite make it into the podcast. So if you'd like to sign up for Colin's newsletter while you're on the website, that's great. We also have a YouTube channel. Not a lot of video goes there at the moment. As we produce video, it does go there. But if you need to listen to the ICQ podcast and you're out and about, or you want to tell somebody about it, an easy way of finding us is on YouTube. The audio podcasts are there on YouTube for you to listen to. I wouldn't suggest you download them from YouTube because they're absolutely massive when you download them from YouTube. But you can actually download the podcast from our website. Once again, www.icqpodcast.com. Other ways you can get in touch with us, Colin and I are both on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn. So, we are available in many ways to be contacted. I'd like to thank each and every one of our donors for your contributions, and thank you very, very much. That does help us keep the podcast advert free. And as I say, thank you very much for your donations. And most especially, I'd like to thank each and every one of our listeners for your downloads. Once again, they are important to us. And the more downloads we see, the more we know you're enjoying it, and the more likely we are to make the 300 mark of episodes. Well, I'm sure we will anyway, but as I say, we do actually appreciate the downloads you do, each and every one of your downloads. So thank you very much for that. Well, the only thing left for me to do now is make that lovely Mrs. B her cup of tea when she comes in from work, find her a biscuit, and don't forget, guys, we'll do it all again in a fortnight's time. 73.